The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Taylor, Texas, as Nora Zimmerman pressed herself against the alley wall, her heart pounding in her chest like a runaway stallion. 3 years had passed since she fled her husband's ranch in the dead of night. 3 years of building a new life. And now, in the spring of 1878, Victor's men had finally tracked her down. Nora clutched the worn leather satchel to her chest, feeling the weight of the few possessions she owned. Her pale blue dress was stained with dust from her frantic run through town, and wisps of auburn hair had escaped her hastily pinned bun. At 24, she had already lived a lifetime of pain under Victor Harrington's cruel hand. She went this way. A gruff voice called out, too close for comfort. Nora recognized that voice. Sam Wilkins, her husband's foreman. If Sam was here, Victor couldn't be far behind. She pushed away from the wall, ready to make a dash for the stables where she kept her mare, but found her path blocked by 2 burly men. "Well, well," drawled the taller one, his silver belt buckle gleaming in the fading light. "Mrs. Harrington, your husband's been mighty worried about you." "I'm not going back," Nora said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I'm not Mrs. Harrington anymore." The men exchanged amused glances. "That ain't for you to decide, madam. Mr. Harrington's mighty insistent on reuniting with his beloved wife." Nora took a step backward, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife tucked in her boot, a precaution she'd never abandoned since her escape. "I believe the lady made herself clear." The deep voice came from behind her. Nora turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, the brim of his hat pulled low. Zachariah Barton stood with his thumbs hooked in his gun belt, his stance relaxed, yet somehow radiating danger. The local rancher had only been in Taylor for about a year, but his reputation as a straight shooter, both with his Colt .45, and his words had quickly spread. "This ain't your business, Barton," said the shorter of Harrington's men, hand hovering near his pistol. "A lady being harassed in my town." Zach's voice remained level. "That makes it my business." The tension stretched between them like a taut rope. Nora could almost feel it trembling in the air. "She's Harrington's wife." Sam Wilkins stepped forward, joining his companions. "We're just bringing her home where she belongs." "She's not going back to him," Zach said, moving to stand beside Nora. "Not if she doesn't want to." "Victor won't take kindly to interference," warned Sam. "He's got friends in high places. And I've got a loaded gun and a dislike for men who chase frightened women." Zach's hand didn't move toward his holster, but the threat was clear enough. Nora stood frozen, caught between her past and this unexpected defender. She'd seen Zachariah Barton around town, had exchanged pleasantries with him at the general store, but they were hardly more than acquaintances. His willingness to stand against Victor's men surprised her. "We'll be back," Sam promised, "with more men. Mr. Harrington wants his wife, and he gets what he wants." "Then he's in for a disappointment," Zach replied. The men backed away, disappearing into the gathering dusk with muttered threats. When they were gone, Nora released the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you, Mr. Barton," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Zach," he corrected, turning to her. In the fading light, she could see his features clearly, strong jawline covered with a neatly trimmed beard, blue eyes that reminded her of the summer sky. "Are you hurt, Mrs. Harrington?" "Zimmerman," she corrected firmly. "My name is Nora Zimmerman now, and no, I'm not hurt. Not yet." "They'll be back," Zach said, glancing in the direction the men had gone. "I know." Nora straightened her shoulders. "I need to leave town." "That might not be the wisest move at the moment. They'll be watching the roads." Zach removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside town. You'd be safe there until we figure something out." Nora eyed him warily. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know a person has the right to choose their own path, and I know fear when I see it in someone's eyes. Nora hesitated, weighing her options. Victor's men would indeed be watching the roads, and she had few allies in Taylor. Most people wouldn't risk crossing Victor Harrington, whose cattle empire stretched across 3 counties. But something in Zachariah Barton's steady gaze told her she could trust him. All right, she finally agreed. But just for tonight. Zach nodded, replacing his hat. My horse is at the hitching post outside the saloon. Can you ride? Better than most men, Nora replied with a ghost of a smile, the first that had crossed her face in days. I don't doubt it, Zach said, and there was respect in his tone that Nora hadn't heard from a man in a long time. They moved cautiously through the back alleys of Taylor, avoiding the main street where Victor's men might be watching. The town was settling into evening, lamps being lit in windows, the saloon piano starting its nightly chorus. When they reached Zach's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, he helped her mount before swinging up behind her. As they rode out of town, Nora felt Zach's solid presence at her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. It had been years since she'd been this close to a man without flinching, and the realization of that fact brought an unexpected lump to her throat. You all right? Zach asked, seeming to sense her tension. Yes, Nora said, her voice catching slightly. Just, thank you. Not many would stand up to Victor's men. I'm not many, Zach replied simply, urging the horse into a faster trot as they left the town behind. They rode in silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. The rhythmic hoofbeats of the horse and the creaking of leather were the only sounds accompanying their journey. Nora found herself relaxing incrementally against Zach's chest, the steady beat of his heart, a reassuring counterpoint to her own still racing pulse. The ranch appeared on the horizon, a modest spread compared to Victor's empire but well-maintained, with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. As they approached, a dog began barking and a figure emerged from the house with a lantern. That's just Miguel, my foreman, Zach explained as they rode into the yard. Miguel Sanchez, a weathered man in his 50s, eyed Nora with curiosity but didn't ask questions as Zach helped her dismount. Any trouble in town? Miguel asked, taking the reins of the horse. Some, Zach replied. Harrington's men are looking for Mrs. Zimmerman here. They might come this way. Miguel nodded, understanding the implications. I'll tell the boys to keep an eye out. Good man, Zach said, then turned to Nora. Come on in, you must be hungry. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, not lavish, but clean and well appointed, with solid furniture and a few touches that spoke of refinement. Bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a painting of a mountain landscape above the fireplace, a hand-knotted rug covering part of the wooden floor. My sister sends things from back east, Zach explained when he caught Nora eyeing a delicate china teacup. She thinks I'm living like a savage out here. It's lovely, Nora said sincerely. A woman emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was plump and middle-aged, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes that assessed Nora quickly. This is Rosa, Zach said. Miguel's wife. She keeps the house and makes sure I don't starve to death. Welcome, Senora, Rosa said with a warm smile. I was just finishing supper. Are you hungry? The question made Nora realize she hadn't eaten since morning, having been too anxious about the strange men she'd noticed watching the dressmaker's shop where she worked. Yes, thank you. Get yourself settled then, Rosa said. I'll bring food to the dining room. Zach showed Nora to a small washroom where she could freshen up. Alone for the first time since her encounter with Victor's men, She let her hands shake as she splashed water on her face. The mirror above the basin reflected a woman with haunted eyes, a fading bruise on her temple partially hidden by her hair, a parting gift from Victor 3 years ago. "Never again," she whispered to her reflection, straightening her shoulders. When she joined Zach in the dining room, Rosa had laid out a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and beans. Nora hadn't realized how famished she was until the first bite touched her lips, and then she had to force herself not to wolf down the food. "You're safe here for the night," Zach said as they ate, "but we need to figure out what happens next. Harrington isn't likely to give up easily." "No, he isn't," Nora agreed, setting down her fork. "Victor believes I belong to him like his cattle or his land. The fact that I left him. It's not just about losing a wife, it's about losing control, losing face." "How long were you married?" Zach asked. 4 years, Nora replied, her voice flat. "My father owed him money. I was 16 when the arrangement was made." Zach's expression darkened. "An arrangement?" "My hand in marriage to clear the debt," Nora clarified. "Victor was 32 and had already buried one wife. I didn't want the marriage, but my father—" She trailed off, the old pain surfacing. "He said it was my duty." "And you stayed for 4 years," Zach said, not a question but an acknowledgement of her strength. Nora nodded. "Until I couldn't anymore. I left in the middle of the night with just the clothes on my back and what money I could take without being missed. I made my way here, changed my name back to my mother's maiden name and started over." "That took courage," Zach said quietly. Nora looked up, meeting his eyes. "No, it just took desperation." After dinner, they moved to the sitting room where Zach poured them each a small glass of whiskey. Nora wasn't usually a drinker, but tonight she accepted gratefully, letting the liquid burn down her throat and warm her from within. "We should contact the sheriff in the morning," Zach suggested, settling into an armchair across from her. "Let him know what's happening." Nora gave a bitter laugh. "Sheriff Davis. He hunts with Victor twice a month and enjoys the privileges of his friendship. He won't help me." "Then we'll try the federal marshal in Austin," Zach said, undeterred. "The law's the law, regardless of who Victor hunts with." "The law says I'm his wife," Nora reminded him. "In the eyes of most, that gives him the right to do as he pleases with me." "Not in my eyes," Zach said firmly, "and not in the eyes of anyone with a sense of decency." Nora studied him, trying to understand this man who had put himself between her and danger without hesitation. "Why did you help me, Mr. Barton? Truly?" Zach looked into his whiskey glass for a long moment before answering. "I've seen what men like Harrington do to those they claim to love. My sister was married to such a man. By the time I got her away from him, she was broken. She's better now, back east with our aunt, but some wounds never fully heal." "I'm sorry about your sister," Nora said softly. "I couldn't help her soon enough," Zach replied, his voice rough with old regrets, "but I was in time to help you." The simple honesty in his words touched something deep within Nora, a place that had been frozen for a very long time. She felt tears threaten and blinked them away, unwilling to show such vulnerability. "You should get some rest," Zach said, noticing her exhaustion despite her efforts to hide it. "Rosa's prepared the guest room upstairs for you." "Thank you," Nora said, setting down her empty glass. "For everything." "Don't thank me yet," Zach warned. "This isn't over. Harrington won't give up easily." "I know," Nora replied, a determination entering her voice. "But neither will I." The guest room was small but comfortable, with a quilt-covered bed and a window overlooking the moonlit pastures. Nora sat on the edge of the bed, removed her boots, and massaged her aching feet. For the first time since spotting Victor's men in town, she allowed herself to think beyond immediate survival. Victor had found her. He would continue to hunt her. She could keep running, but for how long? And to where? The West was vast, but Victor's reach was long, his pockets deep, and his pride wounded. He would never stop looking for the wife who had dared to leave him. Nora lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought of Zachariah Barton, of the quiet strength in his eyes and the way he'd stood against Victor's men without bluster or bravado. She thought of his sister, who had survived a man like Victor and found her way to healing. Could Nora find that same peace someday? With these thoughts swirling in her mind, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Her hand still curled around the knife she kept always close. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee wafting up from downstairs. Nora woke disoriented, reaching instinctively for her knife before remembering where she was. She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, splashed water on her face from the basin provided, and pinned her hair as neatly as she could. Downstairs, she found Zach at the kitchen table, studying a map spread before him. He looked up as she entered, and the warmth in his eyes as he greeted her sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected to," Nora admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Rosa offered her with a grateful smile. "I've been thinking," Zach said, gesturing to the map. "Harrington's men will be watching the roads and likely the train station as well. But there's a freight wagon leaving for San Antonio tomorrow. The driver, Jake Wilson, is a friend. He could take you south, and from there you could catch a train east." "East," Nora echoed, taking a seat across from him. "St. Louis, perhaps, or Chicago. Somewhere Harrington wouldn't think to look, at least not right away." Nora considered the suggestion, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her fingertip. "And start over again. New name, new story, always looking over my shoulder." "It's not ideal," Zach acknowledged. "But it would keep you safe until when?" Nora interrupted, a sudden fire in her voice. "Until Victor dies, until he finds another wife to terrorize. I'm tired of running, Mr. Barton." "Zach," he corrected gently. "Zach," she conceded. "I've been running for 3 years. I've built something here. It's not much, but it's mine. A job at Mrs. Fletcher's dress shop, a small room above the bakery, friends who don't ask too many questions." "And now Harrington knows where you are," Zach pointed out. "Yes," Nora said, setting down her cup with a decisive click. "Maybe it's time to stop running and fight back." Before Zach could respond, the sound of hoofbeats outside drew their attention. He rose quickly, moving to the window. His hand dropped instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Miguel," he said with relief, recognizing his foreman. Then his expression changed. "And company." Nora joined him at the window. Miguel was riding into the yard, but behind him were 2 riders she recognized immediately, Sam Wilkins and another of Victor's men. "They must have followed us last night," Zach muttered. "What do we do?" Nora asked, fear clutching at her throat. Zach's expression was grim but determined. "We face them. Together." Outside, Miguel was keeping the 2 men at the edge of the yard, his rifle casually but unmistakably ready. Zach stepped onto the porch, Nora slightly behind him. "Morning, gentlemen," Zach called. "You're a long way from Harrington land." "We've come for Mrs. Harrington," Sam Wilkins said, his eyes fixed on Nora. "Mr. Harrington is most eager to be reunited with his wife." "As I told you yesterday," Zach replied evenly. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." Sam's companion, a thick-necked man with a scar running down his cheek, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Mr. Harrington says different. Says you got no right to interfere between a man and his wife." "And what does Mrs. Zimmerman say?" Zach asked, emphasizing her chosen name. All eyes turned to Nora, who stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Zach. "I say I'm not Victor's property. I left him 3 years ago, and I'm never going back." "That ain't how marriage works, madam," Sam said with mock politeness. "Till death do you part, remember." "Is that a threat, Wilkins?" Zach's voice had gone dangerously soft. "Just a reminder of sacred vows," Sam replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Harrington's waiting at the Taylor Hotel. He expected us back with his wife by now. He'll be mighty disappointed." "I'm sure he'll survive the disappointment," Nora said coldly. The scarred man laughed. "Oh, he will, but will you, Mrs. Harrington? The boss ain't as forgiving as he once was. 3 years of hunting changes a man." "You've delivered your message," Zach cut in. "Now get off my land." "Or what, Barton?" Sam challenged. "You willing to die for another man's wife?" Miguel moved his horse closer, rifle still ready. 2 more ranch hands appeared from the direction of the barn, both armed. The message was clear. Zach wasn't alone. Sam assessed the situation, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll go, but this isn't over. Mr. Harrington wants his wife back, and what Mr. Harrington wants, he gets." "Not this time," Zach promised quietly. The men wheeled their horses around and rode off, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Nora watched them go, her heart hammering in her chest. "They'll be back," she said. "With more men." "I know," Zach replied, his eyes still on the retreating riders. "Which means we need to move quickly." Back inside, Zach outlined his plan. "Victor's at the hotel in town. That means he's expecting to bring you back today. We need to use that to our advantage." "How?" Nora asked. "By confronting him directly," Zach said. "In public, where he can't simply take you by force without causing a scene." "Victor doesn't care about scenes," Nora warned. "He cares about getting what he wants." "Even Victor has to operate within certain boundaries," Zach argued. "His reputation matters to him. We need to make it clear that taking you back would cost him more than letting you go." Nora shook her head. "You don't understand. To Victor, I'm not just a wife. I'm a possession that ran away. His pride won't let him walk away." "Then we give him something to salve that pride," Zach said, thinking aloud. "A public victory of some kind, even if it's not the one he came for." Rosa, who had been quietly listening while preparing more coffee, spoke up. "What about a divorce? Is that possible?" "Divorce is difficult," Nora said, "and expensive. The courts favor husbands." "But not impossible," Zach pointed out. "Especially with the right lawyer and the right evidence." Nora hesitated, then slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a series of old scars along her forearm. "Evidence like this?" Zach's expression hardened as he looked at the marks, unmistakably made by a cigar. "Yes," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Evidence like that." "There's more," Nora said quietly, letting her sleeve fall back into place. "But I don't know if it would be enough." Victor was always careful not to leave marks where others might see. "Judge Parker in Austin might be sympathetic," Zach suggested. "He's known for his fair-mindedness, even in cases involving prominent men." "Austin is a long way from here," Nora pointed out. "And Victor won't let me simply leave." "No," Zach agreed, "but he might agree to a meeting with terms." "What kind of terms?" Nora asked skeptically. "Terms that appeal to his sense of self-importance," Zach explained. "A formal discussion with witnesses, perhaps even the local preacher as mediator. Make it seem like he's being reasonable, magnanimous even." Nora considered the suggestion. Victor did care about his image as a powerful but just man. It was part of how he'd hidden his true nature for so long. "It might work," she admitted, "but what if he refuses?" "Then we go to Plan B," Zach said grimly, "getting you out of Texas altogether." "I told you, I'm tired of running," Nora reminded him. "Sometimes a strategic retreat is the better part of valor," Zach countered. "But let's try negotiation first." They spent the morning crafting a carefully worded letter to Victor, requesting a formal meeting at the town church with Reverend Thomas present. Miguel rode into town to deliver it, watching carefully for any sign he was being followed upon his return. While they waited, Zach showed Nora around the ranch. It was smaller than Victor's spread but well managed, with healthy cattle and good grazing land. Zach had built it from almost nothing over the past few years, having come west after the war with little more than determination and the skills he'd learned growing up on his family's farm in Virginia. "It's beautiful," Nora said as they stood on a rise overlooking the pastures. "Peaceful." "Most days," Zach agreed with a smile. "When I'm not harboring runaway wives and antagonizing powerful ranchers." Nora laughed despite herself, the sound startling in its unfamiliarity. How long had it been since she'd truly laughed? "I'm sorry to bring trouble to your door." "Don't be," Zach said simply. "Some troubles are worth having." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding that went beyond words. Nora looked away first, unnerved by the warmth spreading through her chest. Miguel returned mid-afternoon with Victor's response. The letter, written in Victor's precise hand, agreed to the meeting at the church the following morning with conditions. Nora was to come alone, and afterward, regardless of the outcome, she would return to the Harrington ranch for a private discussion with her husband. "Absolutely not," Zach said after reading the letter. "It's a trap." "Of course it is," Nora agreed, "but we can set conditions of our own." They drafted another letter, agreeing to the meeting but insisting that Reverend Thomas and Sheriff Davis both be present, and that Nora would be accompanied by her legal representative, Zachariah Barton. Furthermore, she would not under any circumstances return to the Harrington ranch, but would meet Victor only in public places with witnesses present. "He won't like it," Nora predicted as Miguel prepared to ride back to town with their response. "No," Zach agreed. "But he'll agree to it if he wants to maintain the appearance of reasonableness." Miguel returned at dusk with Victor's grudging acceptance of their terms, along with a warning. "Mr. Harrington says to tell you he's not a patient man, and his patience with this situation is wearing particularly thin." "Noted," Zach said dryly. "Tell the men to keep a close watch tonight." "I wouldn't put it past Harrington to try something underhanded." The night passed tensely, but without incident. Nora slept fitfully, dreaming of Victor's hands around her throat, of running through endless corridors that led nowhere. She woke before dawn, her nightgown damp with sweat, and sat by the window watching the stars fade as the first hint of morning lightened the eastern sky. A soft knock on her door startled her. "Nora, are you awake?" Zach's voice was low, concerned. "Yes," she called back, pulling on her robe. "Come in." Zach entered, already dressed for the day in clean clothes, his hair damp from washing. "I thought I heard you moving around. Bad dreams." "Old memories," Nora corrected, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hard to shake." Zach nodded in understanding. "Rosa's making breakfast." "You should eat something before we head into town." "I'm not sure I can," Nora admitted. "My stomach's in knots." "Try anyway," Zach encouraged. "You'll need your strength today." They ate in relative silence, Nora managing a few bites of eggs and a slice of toast. Rosa packed food for them to take, motherly concern evident in her fussing. Miguel prepared the wagon, checking and double-checking the harnesses. "I've sent word ahead to some friends in town," Zach told Nora as they prepared to leave. "Good men who'll be nearby if we need them." "I don't want anyone else risking themselves for me," Nora protested. "They're not just doing it for you," Zach replied. "Men like Harrington need to be stood up to, or they'll keep thinking they can do as they please." The ride into Taylor was tense, both of them scanning the landscape for signs of ambush. But they reached town without incident, the streets already busy with morning activities. They pulled up outside the church, a modest white clapboard building with a small steeple. Reverend Thomas met them at the door, his kind face creased with concern. "Mrs. Harrington, forgive me, Mrs. Zimmerman, Mr. Barton, they're waiting inside." "Sheriff Davis came?" Zach asked. The Reverend nodded, though not happily. "And Mr. Harrington brought his lawyer, Mr. Reed, from Austin." "I expected as much," Zach said. He turned to Nora. "Ready?" Nora took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress, her best one, borrowed from Rosa and hastily altered to fit. "As I'll ever be." Inside the church, Victor Harrington sat in the front pew, his lawyer beside him. Sheriff Davis stood awkwardly by the pulpit, clearly uncomfortable with the proceedings. Victor rose as Nora entered, his eyes raking over her with a possessiveness that made her skin crawl. At 42, Victor was still a handsome man, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading his dark hair at the temples. His clothes were expensively tailored, his boots polished to a high shine. He looked every inch the successful rancher, respected and feared throughout the county. "My dear," he said, his voice smooth as honey but with an underlying hardness that Nora remembered all too well. "You're looking well. Better than I expected after 3 years of independence." "Victor," Nora acknowledged coolly, refusing to be baited. "Mrs. Zimmerman has asked me to represent her interests in this matter," Zach said formally, standing beside Nora. Victor's gaze shifted to Zach, assessing him with the cold calculation of a predator. "So I understand, Mr. Barton, though I fail to see what interest you have in my marital affairs." "My interest is in justice and the right of every person to live free from fear," Zach replied evenly. "Shall we begin?" The meeting proceeded with a formality that belied the tension crackling beneath the surface. Victor's lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Reed, presented their position. Nora was Victor's lawfully wedded wife. Her departure constituted abandonment, and she was legally and morally obligated to return to her husband's home. Zach countered with a different narrative. Nora had fled an abusive situation, feared for her life, and had established herself independently over the past 3 years. He hinted at evidence of Victor's cruelty that could be presented in court if necessary. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Barton," Reed said stiffly. "Do you have proof of this supposed abuse?" "I have scars," Nora spoke up, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands, "and witnesses from the Harrington Ranch who saw how I was treated." "Disgruntled former employees, no doubt," Victor said dismissively. "And accidents happen, my dear. You were always so clumsy." "Enough," Reverend Thomas intervened. "We are here to seek a peaceful resolution, not to trade accusations." "Indeed," Reed agreed. "Mr. Harrington is prepared to be generous despite his wife's indiscretions." "I have committed no indiscretions," Nora said firmly. "I left a man who hurt me repeatedly." "Mr. Harrington is willing to overlook the past 3 years," Reed continued as if she hadn't spoken. "He will welcome his wife home, restore her to her proper position, and no legal action will be taken regarding the property she took when she left." "Money," Victor clarified, his eyes hard. "Nearly $500. Money I earned managing your household accounts," Nora countered. "A fraction of what was rightfully mine." "Nothing was rightfully yours," Victor snapped, his composure slipping for the first time. "Everything you had I gave you." "Including these?" Nora asked quietly, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the cigar burns. The church fell silent. Sheriff Davis shifted uncomfortably, looking away. Reed whispered urgently in Victor's ear, but Victor waved him off, his face darkening with anger. "You always were prone to dramatic gestures, Nora," he said coldly. "Those could have come from anywhere." "I have a doctor's statement," Zach interjected, producing a folded document from his pocket. Dr. Miller examined Mrs. Zimmerman this morning and confirmed these are burns consistent with deliberate injury, not accidents. This was a bluff. There had been no examination, but Victor didn't know that. He stared at the paper, then at Nora's exposed arm, calculation replacing anger in his eyes. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we could discuss a different arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Zach asked. "A divorce," Victor said, the word clearly distasteful to him. "Quiet, discreet. No allegations of impropriety on either side. A simple dissolution based on irreconcilable differences." Nora glanced at Zach, hardly daring to hope. A divorce would mean freedom legally and completely. "And in exchange?" Zach asked, suspicious of Victor's sudden reversal. "In exchange, Nora returns the money she took, signs a statement that she left of her own accord for personal reasons, and agrees never to speak publicly about our marriage." Victor's smile was cold. "My reputation remains intact and she gets her freedom." "The money is spent," Nora said. "I've been living on it for 3 years." "Then you'll work to repay it," Victor snapped. "No," Zach cut in. "The money was compensation for years of unpaid labor and suffering. It's not negotiable." Victor's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently again. After a moment, Victor nodded tersely. "Fine. Keep the money, but the statement of discretion is non-negotiable." "I have no desire to speak publicly about our marriage," Nora said truthfully. The very thought of discussing those years made her ill. "Then we have an agreement in principle," Reed said, producing papers from his briefcase. "I've taken the liberty of drafting the necessary documents. We'll need time to review them," Zach said. "Of course," Reed replied smoothly. "Shall we reconvene tomorrow morning?" Nora looked at Victor, trying to understand his sudden capitulation. His face revealed nothing, but there was something in his eyes that made her uneasy. He had never surrendered so easily on anything in all the time she had known him. "Tomorrow morning," she agreed cautiously. As they prepared to leave, Victor stepped closer to Nora, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "This isn't over, my dear. Not really." "It will be when I sign those papers," Nora replied, refusing to be intimidated despite the chill his words sent down her spine. Victor smiled, a gesture that never reached his eyes. "We'll see." Outside, in the bright Texas sunlight, Nora released a shaky breath. He gave in too easily. "I was thinking the same thing," Zach agreed, helping her into the wagon. "Victor's planning something." "But what?" "If he signs the divorce papers, if," Zach emphasized. "I wouldn't count on anything until the ink is dry and the papers are filed with the court." They drove back to the ranch in thoughtful silence. The apparent victory felt hollow, shadowed by Victor's parting words and the sense that he was not a man who accepted defeat. At the ranch, they reviewed the divorce papers Reed had provided. They seemed straightforward enough. A dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences, a statement of discretion from Nora, no financial claims from either party. "It looks legitimate," Zach said, setting down the papers, "but I still don't trust it." "Neither do I," Nora admitted. "Victor would never let me go this easily, not unless he had something else planned." "We'll need to be extra vigilant tonight," Zach decided. "I wouldn't put it past him to try to take you by force before the papers are signed." Zach doubled the guard around the ranch that night, with men posted at strategic points and regular patrols of the perimeter. He himself remained awake, rifle across his knees as he sat on the porch, watching the moonlit landscape for any sign of movement. Nora joined him close to midnight, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air. "You should get some rest," she said, sitting beside him on the porch steps. "I'll rest when you're safely divorced and Victor Harrington is back on his own land," Zach replied, his eyes still scanning the darkness. "Why are you doing all this?" Nora asked softly. You barely know me. Zach was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. Because no one should have to live in fear, and because he hesitated. Because from the moment I saw you in that alley, something told me you were worth fighting for. Nora's breath caught at the simple honesty in his words. In the silver moonlight, his profile was strong and steady, a man who meant what he said and said what he meant. So different from Victor's smooth lies and calculated cruelty. "Thank you," she whispered, her hand finding his in the darkness. His fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch, a horse nickering softly in the stable, the distant howl of a coyote creating a peaceful backdrop. "Tell me about your life before Victor," Zach said eventually. "If you don't mind talking about it." Nora leaned back, looking up at the star-studded sky. "I grew up in Missouri on a small farm. My mother died when I was 12, and it was just my father and me after that. He wasn't a bad man, just weak. When the farm started failing, he looked for any way out of his debts. And Victor Harrington offered one." Nora nodded. "He was passing through on business, stayed at our local inn. He saw me in town and asked questions. The next day, he was at our farm offering to clear my father's debts in exchange for my hand in marriage." "You were only 16, Zach said, disgust evident in his voice. "Old enough to marry by law," Nora replied with a shrug. "My father thought he was securing my future. Victor was wealthy, respected, and promised I would want for nothing. Except freedom and safety," Zach said quietly. "Those weren't considerations in the arrangement," Nora agreed. "At first, Victor was. Not kind exactly, but not cruel either. He treated me like a prized possession, something to be displayed but not heard. It wasn't until after we returned to Texas, to his ranch, that I began to see who he really was." "What happened?" "I spilled tea on an important contract," Nora said, the memory still vivid. "He waited until his guest left, then broke my wrist. He said it was to teach me to be more careful." "That was the beginning." Zach's hand tightened around hers, but he didn't interrupt. "The worst part wasn't the pain," Nora continued. "It was the isolation. Victor made sure I had no friends, no allies. The servants were afraid of him, the neighboring ranchers respected him, and the town relied on his business. I was completely alone." "But you got away," Zach reminded her. "Yes," Nora said, a hint of pride entering her voice. "I planned for months, saving small amounts of money, learning the routines of the ranch. Then one night when Victor was away in Austin, I took my chance. I rode through the night to the nearest town, sold my wedding ring, and bought passage on a stagecoach heading east. I kept moving for weeks, taking odd jobs, never staying anywhere too long. Until Taylor." "Until Taylor," Nora confirmed. "Something about this place felt right. Mrs. Fletcher needed help in her dress shop, and she didn't ask too many questions when I said I was a widow. For 3 years, I've lived quietly, saving money, making a few friends. I started to believe I might actually be free." "You will be," Zach promised. "Tomorrow when those papers are signed." "If Victor signs them," Nora said, doubt creeping back into her voice. "He will," Zach assured her. "One way or another." They fell silent again, the night deepening around them. Nora was acutely aware of Zach's hand still holding hers, the solid warmth of his shoulder next to hers. For the first time in years, she felt not just safe but somehow at home. The thought startled her. Home had been a concept she'd abandoned long ago, along with other dreams that seemed impossible. Love, family, belonging. Yet sitting here with Zach, those dreams didn't seem quite so out of reach. "We should try to get some sleep," Zach said eventually, though he made no move to release her hand. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "Yes," Nora agreed reluctantly. She wasn't ready for this moment to end, this peaceful interlude before whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. As if reading her thoughts, Zach turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Nora, when this is over, when you're free, what will you do?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Continue working for Mrs. Fletcher, I suppose. Keep building my life here." "Here in Taylor?" Zach asked, a note in his voice she couldn't quite interpret. "Yes," Nora said, "if that's all right." "More than all right," Zach replied softly. "I'd like that very much." Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Zach's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. His kiss was gentle, tentative, so different from Victor's demanding possession. Nora's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into him, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you standing up to Harrington's men in that alley," he confessed. "I'm glad you waited until now," Nora replied with a small smile. "I might have slapped you then." Zach laughed softly, the sound warming her more thoroughly than the shawl around her shoulders. "Worth the risk," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The moment was shattered by the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Zach was on his feet instantly, rifle ready, as one of his ranch hands galloped into the yard. "Rider coming," the man reported breathlessly. "Just one from the direction of town." Zach nodded, tension returning to his frame. "Get inside," he told Nora. "I'm staying with you," she countered. Before Zach could argue, the rider appeared at the edge of the ranch yard. In the moonlight, they could see it was Miguel, riding hard. "Trouble," Miguel called as he reined in his horse. "Harrington's men are in town, drinking heavily and making threats. The sheriff's done nothing to stop them." "How many?" Zach asked grimly. "At least 10, maybe more," Miguel reported. "They're saying they'll come for Mrs. Zimmerman at dawn if she doesn't return willingly." "So much for the divorce agreement," Nora said bitterly. Victor was playing for time, Zach realized. He never intended to sign those papers. He just wanted to know where you were to gather his men. "What do we do?" Nora asked, fear and determination warring within her. Zach considered their options. "We could try to get you out tonight, but they might be watching the roads already. And running would just mean starting over somewhere else, always looking over your shoulder." "No more running," Nora said firmly. "I told you I'm done with that." Zach nodded, respect in his eyes. "Then we stand and fight if we have to, but first we try one more approach." "What's that?" Miguel asked. "We bring the fight to them," Zach said. "On our terms, not theirs." The plan was risky but straightforward. Instead of waiting for Victor's men to come to the ranch at dawn, they would return to town now, rally what allies they could, and confront Victor at the hotel. The element of surprise would be on their side, and a public confrontation would force Victor to maintain at least a facade of civility. "It's too dangerous," Nora protested. "His men are drunk and armed, which makes them unpredictable but also less effective," Zach pointed out. "And we'll have our own support. Taylor may be small, but it has good people who don't take kindly to bullying." Miguel was dispatched to quietly gather trusted friends: the blacksmith, the livery stable owner, several small ranchers who had no love for Victor Harrington's heavy-handed ways. Zach sent another man to fetch Judge Wilson, who lived just outside town and was known for his strict interpretation of the law, regardless of a man's wealth or influence. Within an hour, their small force was ready. Nora insisted on riding with them, despite Zach's concerns. "This is my fight more than anyone's," she reminded him. "I need to face him." The town of Taylor was quiet as they rode in, most establishments closed for the night. Only the saloon showed signs of life, light spilling from its windows along with the sounds of raucous laughter and off-key singing. "Harrington's men," Zach murmured. "But where's Victor?" "The hotel," Nora said with certainty. "He always stays at the best accommodations available." They approached the Taylor Hotel, a two-story building that was the pride of the small town. A light burned in a second-floor window despite the late hour. "Miguel, you and the others keep an eye on the saloon," Zach instructed. "Make sure none of Harrington's men interfere. Judge Wilson, if you'd accompany us." The judge, a stern-faced man in his 60s, nodded gravely. "Glad to, Barton." Never did like Harrington's way of doing business. The night clerk at the hotel was startled by their arrival but directed them to Victor's room when Judge Wilson made it clear this was official business. They climbed the stairs, Zach leading the way, Nora at his side, and Judge Wilson following. Zach knocked firmly on Victor's door. "Harrington, we need to talk." There was a pause, then the sound of movement inside the room. The door opened to reveal Victor, still fully dressed despite the late hour, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes narrowed as he took in the group before him. "Barton," he said coldly, "and my wayward wife. To what do I owe this late-night visit? Your men are making threats in town," Zach said bluntly. "Planning to ride out to my ranch at dawn to take Mrs. Zimmerman by force." "My men are enthusiastic in their loyalty," Victor replied with a thin smile, "but I can't be responsible for every word spoken over whiskey." "You're responsible for sending them," Nora said, stepping forward, "just as you're responsible for this." She held up the divorce papers. "Were you ever planning to sign these, Victor? Or was it all just a ploy to find me?" Victor's gaze hardened. "You're my wife, Nora. That paper doesn't change that fact." "The law says otherwise," Judge Wilson spoke up. "If these papers are signed and properly filed, the marriage is dissolved." "And if I choose not to sign?" Victor challenged. "Then we take this matter to court," Zach said. "With evidence of your abuse, witnesses to your threats, and testimony about your character. How would that affect your standing in the community, Victor? Your business dealings? Your precious reputation?" Victor's face darkened with anger. "You're bluffing. No court would take a woman's word over mine." "Perhaps not just her word," Judge Wilson interjected, "but with supporting evidence and witnesses. I've presided over such cases before, Mr. Harrington. The courts are beginning to take a dimmer view of husbands who abuse their position." Victor's calculating gaze moved from one face to another, assessing his options. Nora could almost see the thoughts racing behind his eyes, weighing the cost of a public scandal against the satisfaction of forcing her return. "Even if you win in court," Victor said finally, addressing Nora, "you'll lose everything else. No one will hire the woman who dragged Victor Harrington's name through the mud. You'll be ostracized, penniless." "No," Zach contradicted. "She won't be alone. Taylor takes care of its own." "And she's one of us now," Judge Wilson added. "Has been for 3 years, by all accounts a hardworking, respectable woman." "Can you say the same, Harrington?" Victor's jaw tightened, but Nora could see the moment when calculation replaced fury in his eyes. Victor was, above all, a pragmatic man. He didn't waste resources on losing battles. "Fine," he said abruptly, holding out his hand for the papers. "Give them here." "Not so fast," Zach said. "We'll do this properly with witnesses. Tomorrow morning, as agreed, 9 o'clock at the church. You, your lawyer, the sheriff, and the reverend. We sign, file the papers, and you and your men leave Taylor by noon." "And if I refuse?" Victor challenged. "Then we proceed with the court case," Zach said simply. "Your choice, Harrington. A quiet divorce that saves your reputation or a public scandal that destroys it." Victor stared at him for a long moment, hatred evident in every line of his face. Then, with visible effort, he mastered himself. 9 o'clock, he agreed coldly. Now get out of my room. In the hallway, Nora released a shaky breath. Do you think he'll actually sign? Yes, Judge Wilson answered before Zach could. Harrington's a businessman first and foremost. He knows when to cut his losses. But he'll never forgive this humiliation, Nora warned. He'll find a way to retaliate. Let him try, Zach said grimly. Some things are worth fighting for. His eyes met hers, and despite the danger still surrounding them, Nora felt a flutter of hope unfurl in her chest. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. They spent what remained of the night at the judge's house on the outskirts of town, deemed safer than returning to the ranch with Victor's men still drinking in the saloon. At dawn, Zach rode out briefly to check on his ranch and found it undisturbed. Miguel and the others had kept a watchful eye on Victor's men all night, making sure they remained in town. By 8:30, a small crowd had gathered outside the church, word having spread of the confrontation between Zach Barton and Victor Harrington. The townsfolk of Taylor had always been curious about the quiet, private Mrs. Zimmerman who worked at the dress shop. Now the rumors that she was actually the runaway wife of wealthy rancher Victor Harrington had set tongues wagging furiously. Are you ready for this? Zach asked Nora as they approached the church. She was wearing the same borrowed dress from yesterday, her hair neatly pinned, her chin high despite the whispers that followed them. Yes, she said with quiet determination. More than ready. Inside, Victor and his lawyer were already waiting, along with Sheriff Davis and Reverend Thomas. Victor's face was a mask of cold civility, but his eyes burned with barely suppressed rage as they entered. Let's get this over with, he said curtly. Reed, the lawyer, laid out the divorce papers on the Reverend's small desk. He had made a few changes overnight, Nora noted as she reviewed them with Judge Wilson's help, but nothing substantial. The core agreement remained, a dissolution based on irreconcilable differences, mutual discretion, and no financial claims. It all appears in order, Judge Wilson confirmed. Victor signed first, his pen scratching across the paper with angry force. Nora signed next, her hand steady despite the emotion welling in her throat. 3 years of fear, of looking over her shoulder, of nightmares in which Victor found her and dragged her back to his ranch, all coming to an end with a few strokes of a pen. Judge Wilson will file these with the court in Austin next week, Reverend Thomas said, watching as Reed made copies for each party. Until then, both parties agree to abide by the terms discussed. I've upheld my part, Victor said coldly. Now I expect Mrs. Zimmerman to uphold hers. Absolute discretion about our marriage. You have my word, Nora replied evenly. I have no desire to speak of those years to anyone. Victor's eyes narrowed, searching her face for any sign of deception. Finding none, he nodded curtly and turned to leave. One more thing, Harrington, Zach said, stopping him at the door. Your men leave with you today, and they don't come back looking for trouble. Victor turned, his gaze moving from Zach to Nora and back again. A thin, unpleasant smile curved his lips. I see how it is, he said softly. You found a new protector, Nora. I wonder if he knows what he's getting, a woman who abandons her vows when things become difficult. I know exactly who she is, Zach replied, his voice level but with an underlying steel. A woman of remarkable courage and strength. A woman any man would be fortunate to know. Something flickered in Victor's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a grudging reassessment. Then it was gone, replaced by cold disdain. She's yours then, Barton. Let's see how long before you regret it. With that parting shot, he stalked out of the church, Reed hurrying after him. Through the open door, they could see Victor's men gathered outside, faces sullen as their employer emerged and barked orders to prepare for departure. "It's done," Judge Wilson said, gathering the signed papers carefully. "Congratulations, Mrs. Zimmerman. You're a free woman." "Thank you," Nora said, emotion finally breaking through her composed exterior. "All of you." Reverend Thomas patted her hand kindly. "The Lord helps those who help themselves, my dear. You showed considerable courage throughout this ordeal." Even Sheriff Davis, uncomfortable but seemingly relieved that the situation had been resolved without violence in his town, offered a gruff congratulation before hurrying out, presumably to ensure that Victor and his men actually left as promised. Outside, the townsfolk who had gathered watched with undisguised curiosity as Victor Harrington and his entourage mounted their horses and rode out of Taylor. Nora stood on the church steps, Zach beside her, as her former husband disappeared from view without a backward glance. "Are you all right?" Zach asked quietly. "Better than all right," Nora replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I feel light, as if a weight I've carried for so long has finally been lifted." "It has," Zach said, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "You're free, Nora, truly free." The realization washed over her like a cleansing rain. Free. No more looking over her shoulder, no more nightmares of being dragged back, no more Victor Harrington controlling her fate. Free to build her life as she chose, to make her own decisions, to follow her own heart. And her heart, she was beginning to understand, was leading her toward the man standing beside her, whose steady presence had been her anchor through the storm. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at him. Zach's smile was warm, his eyes full of possibilities. "Anything you want, Nora. It's your choice. Always." Those simple words, your choice, nearly undid her. How long had it been since anyone had offered her choices instead of commands? Since someone had seen her as a person with her own will, her own desires? "Right now," she said, finding her voice, "I'd like to go home. To your ranch, if that's all right. Just until I sort things out." "The ranch is yours for as long as you want it," Zach replied. "Forever, if you like." The hint of a deeper meaning in his words wasn't lost on Nora, but neither of them was ready to speak it aloud. Not yet. They had time to learn each other, to build something slowly and surely, on a foundation of mutual respect and growing affection. They rode back to the ranch side by side, the future stretching before them like the open Texas landscape, full of promise and possibility. For the first time in years, Nora allowed herself to dream of happiness without fear shadowing its edges. At the ranch, Rosa welcomed them with open arms and a hearty meal, clucking over Nora like a mother hen. "You need feeding up," she insisted. "Too thin from all this worry." Life settled into a new rhythm over the following weeks. Nora returned to her job at Mrs. Fletcher's dress shop, but moved permanently to the ranch, taking the guest room as her own. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the sunset with Zach, talking about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Slowly, Nora began to open up about her years with Victor, releasing the poisonous memories that had festered inside her for so long. Zach listened without judgment, offering comfort when she needed it and space when she didn't. In turn, he shared his own past, the loss of his parents when he was 20, his service in the war, his decision to come west and build something of his own. He told her about his sister Elizabeth, still recovering from her own abusive marriage back in Virginia, and his hopes that someday she might join him in Texas. Their first kiss on the porch that night before confronting Victor wasn't their last. Their relationship deepened gradually, neither of them wanting to rush what was growing between them. Zach was unfailingly patient, never pushing, always letting Nora set the pace. Spring gave way to the heat of Texas summer, and the ranch flourished under their combined care. Nora discovered a talent for bookkeeping, organizing Zach's haphazard accounts with a skill that impressed him. "You should be running this place," he told her one evening as they reviewed the month's figures. "You've got a better head for business than I do." "We make a good team," Nora replied. "You handle the cattle and the land, I'll handle the books." The casual "we" hung in the air between them, a declaration of sorts. Zach reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "We do make a good team," he agreed, his voice deepening. "In all ways." That night, for the first time, Nora didn't return to the guest room. Instead, she stayed with Zach, discovering with wonder that physical intimacy could be gentle, joyful, an expression of love rather than a demonstration of power. In his arms, the last shadows of Victor's touch were finally banished, replaced by new memories of tenderness and passion. As summer turned to fall, talk in Taylor turned to the annual Harvest Festival. It would be the first major social event Nora would attend openly as herself, not hiding behind the fictional backstory of widowhood she'd maintained for 3 years. "Are you nervous?" Zach asked as they prepared to ride into town for the festival. "A little," Nora admitted, smoothing down her new dress made specially for the occasion. "People will talk." "Let them," Zach said, helping her into the wagon. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." The town square had been transformed for the festival, with colorful bunting, tables laden with food, and a platform for dancing. As Zach and Nora arrived, they drew curious glances, but also warm greetings. The story of Nora's divorce and Zach's role in standing up to Victor Harrington had elevated them both in the town's estimation. Mrs. Fletcher bustled over to greet them, patting Nora's hand affectionately. "Don't you look lovely, my dear, and with such a handsome escort?" Nora felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. I always knew there was more to your story than you let on," the older woman confided. "But I figured you'd tell it when you were ready, and look at you now, free and happy, just as you deserve to be." The afternoon passed in a blur of food, music, and conversation. Nora found herself drawn into the community as never before, no longer holding herself apart out of fear of discovery. She danced with Zach, laughing as he twirled her around the platform, her heart lighter than she could ever remember it being. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Zach led her away from the crowd, toward a quiet corner of the square where a massive old oak tree provided shade and privacy. "I have something to ask you," he said, suddenly serious. "Something I've been wanting to ask for a while now." Nora's heart quickened. "Yes." Zach took both her hands in his blue eyes intent on her face. "Nora Zimmerman, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought joy and purpose to my days in ways I never expected. I know you've had reason to be wary of marriage, and I would understand if you never wanted to enter that institution again." "Zach," Nora began, but he gently squeezed her hands, asking her to let him finish. "I don't care what we call it," he continued. "Marriage, partnership, companionship, the name doesn't matter to me. What matters is that we face the future together as equals, building something meaningful side by side. I love you, Nora, with all my heart. And I'm asking if you would consider making our arrangement permanent in whatever way feels right to you." Tears blurred Nora's vision, but they were tears of happiness, not sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered. "And yes, I would be honored to build a future with you." Zach's face lit with joy. From his pocket, he produced a small ring, simple but elegant, a single pearl set in gold. "It was my mother's," he explained. "If you don't like it, we can choose something else." "It's perfect," Nora interrupted, holding out her hand. "Absolutely perfect." Zach slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart overflow. Around them, the festival continued, but they were in a world of their own, a world they were creating together. The wedding for Nora had decided she wanted to reclaim the institution that had once been her prison, and transform it into a celebration of freedom and choice was held that December. A small, joyful ceremony in the same church where she had signed her divorce papers months earlier. Reverend Thomas officiated, beaming with satisfaction at the happy conclusion to what had begun as a tense confrontation. Judge Wilson returned from Austin for the occasion, bringing official confirmation that the divorce had been recorded and was fully binding. "Just to set your mind at ease," he told Nora, "though I hear Harrington's moved on engaged to a banker's daughter in San Antonio, according to the gossip." "Good," Nora said sincerely. "I wish her better luck than I had." The new year of 1879 brought more changes. Elizabeth, Zach's sister, finally agreed to visit from Virginia, arriving on a spring day that painted the Texas landscape with wildflowers. She was a quieter version of her brother, with the same blue eyes but a hesitancy in her manner that reminded Nora painfully of herself 3 years earlier. "She needs time," Zach said as they watched Elizabeth exploring the garden Rosa had planted behind the house. "And space to heal." "We have plenty of both," Nora assured him, leaning against his shoulder, "and experience with the process." Elizabeth stayed through the summer and into the fall, gradually coming out of her shell, finding purpose in helping with the household and assisting Rosa with her expanding garden. By Christmas, when the question of her returning east arose, she made her decision. "I'd like to stay," she told them over dinner. "If you'll have me, I feel safe here, useful." "This is your home for as long as you want it," Zach assured her, echoing the words he had once said to Nora. "Forever if you like." The new year brought another blessing, as Nora discovered she was expecting a child. The news was met with jubilation throughout the ranch, with Rosa immediately planning expansions to the garden to grow more vegetables for the baby, and Miguel carving a beautiful wooden cradle as a gift. "Are you happy?" Zach asked one evening as they sat on the porch, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "Truly happy." Nora considered the question, looking out over the land that had become her home, thinking of the people who had become her family not by blood or by forced arrangement, but by choice and love. "More than I ever believed possible," she answered truthfully. "I have everything I never dared to dream of." Their son, James Thomas Barton, was born on a clear September morning in 1880, entering the world with a lusty cry that made the midwife laugh. "Strong lungs," she declared, placing the swaddled infant in Nora's arms. "A fighter like his parents." Zach, allowed into the room after the birth, looked down at his wife and son with wonder and pride. "He's perfect," he whispered, a finger gently tracing the baby's downy cheek, "just like his mother." Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby's arrival, days marked by feedings and diaper changes, nights by lullabies and rocking. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding under Zach and Nora's joint management. They added more land, more cattle, and hired additional hands to help with the growing operation. Elizabeth, to everyone's surprise, found romance with the new schoolteacher who arrived in Taylor that fall, a thoughtful man named Henry Crawford, who treated her with a gentleness and respect that slowly won her trust. Their courtship proceeded at a careful pace, neither of them rushing what was building between them. "You've created something remarkable here," Elizabeth told Nora one afternoon as they watched James toddling after a butterfly in the garden. "A true home, a haven." "We created it together," Nora corrected her. "All of us. That's what family does. Family." The word had once been associated with obligation and control in Nora's mind. Now it meant love, support, and freedom to be herself, to grow, to make mistakes and learn from them, to give and receive love without conditions or constraints. As James grew from infant to toddler to little boy, Nora often thought about the twists of fate that had brought her to this point. If Victor's men hadn't found her that day in Taylor, if Zach hadn't intervened, if she had chosen to run again instead of standing her ground, how different her life might have been. No use dwelling on might have beens, Zach said when she shared these thoughts with him. We're here now, together. That's what matters. He was right, of course. The past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. What defined her were the choices she made each day to love, to build, to live fully in the present while looking forward to the future. 3 years after James's birth, their family expanded again with the arrival of a daughter, Rose Elizabeth Barton, a delicate beauty with Zach's blue eyes and Nora's auburn hair. James, now a sturdy 4-year-old with his father's adventurous spirit, appointed himself his sister's protector, a role he took very seriously. "No one's ever going to hurt her," he declared solemnly, standing beside the cradle. "Not while I'm around." Nora exchanged a glance with Zach, seeing in his eyes the same blend of pride and poignancy she felt. Their children would grow up knowing what it meant to be protected, not possessed, loved, not controlled, valued for who they were, not what someone else wanted them to be. "That's right," Zach agreed, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "In this family, we look out for each other." On a warm evening in the summer of 1885, with Rose toddling after butterflies in the garden and James helping Miguel feed the horses, Nora sat on the porch with Zach, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him, the years having shaped them to fit perfectly together. "You ever think about that day?" Nora asked. "When Victor's men came for me and you said I wasn't going back to him?" "Sometimes," Zach admitted, his hand absently stroking her arm. "It was the best decision I ever made, standing between you and them." "Even though you didn't know me, I knew enough," Zach replied, echoing what he had said to her that very first night. "I knew fear when I saw it in your eyes. And later I knew courage when I saw it in your heart." Nora turned her face up to his, still marveling after all these years at the love she saw reflected there. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." "No," Zach said, bending to kiss her gently. "Thank you for trusting me, for staying, for making this house a home, and my life complete." As the last rays of sunlight gilded the landscape around them, Nora thought of the journey that had brought her here, from the frightened girl who had married Victor Harrington to the confident woman who had built a life on her own terms. It hadn't been an easy path, but every step, every challenge had led her to this moment, this man, this family, this peace. The past was behind her, the future stretching bright before them. And in the present, in this perfect moment as twilight settled over their land, Nora Zimmerman Barton was exactly where she belonged, home at last.